We are honored to introduce our guest today, Brother Abdullah Andalusi, who is an Islamic activist thinker and an inspirational thinker and an inspirational speaker. I will allow him to introduce himself, but the topic today is about gender equality and whether Islam promotes gender equality. The talk will be approximately 45 minutes long, followed by a Q&A session, God willing. Enjoy the talk.
Short and sweet. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu salam Kareem Muhammad. Ali Tayyibin wa Sahbihi Salihin. I greet you all the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Now the question is, does Islam promote gender equality? And it's a question which has received quite a lot of attention, quite a lot of interest, and many people. So many people are fascinated to see about whether this is the case. There's something in Islam which is contrary to gender equality, or does Islam actually promote it and conducive to it? But I want to ask a more fundamental question, because a lot of the times the agenda that is set for us is set by something external to us, by society, by pundits, by media, by politicians. But we have to ask a more fundamental question: why equality? And not just about gender, but just equality full stop, the actual concept. Why equality? Why are we equal, or how do you justify equality? Let's look at the current prevailing political philosophical justifications for it. So they say we're equal, but on which basis do you justify human equality? It used to be based on the idea of natural rights, that we all, nature ordains that we are equal. Does nature ordain that we're equal? Does nature care about equality? If you look at nature, stronger animals, stronger beasts, stronger creatures devour or show no little sympathy for lesser or weaker beasts if their interests are challenged. We see this in monkeys, we see this in apes, we see this in ants, we see this in almost every animal species there is. Nature doesn't seem to care about equality. If you are stronger, more intelligent, more resistant to disease, more resistant to things like cancer, or you age better, you have a natural advantage, you will survive longer, you will have your progeny will be most likely to be more successful, and you'll have more of progeny than any rival. So nature doesn't really care about equality. What other basis can then we derive equality from? Let's say, well, maybe we're just equal in sharing an attribute of being human. But this is an arbitrary attribute, because I could say that we're all equal to the chairs we sit on because we share the common attribute of matter, and the chair has the same attribute, even organic matter as well. It's made from wood, right? So even organic matter. So why this particular attribute we're singling out and saying we're equal in sharing an attribute, and the attribute itself isn't equal? How would you define even humans? Would be a good discussion. Would you say that a human being is someone that has intelligence? Or what if there's people who don't have intelligence? Are they not equal then, and not deserving of your respect? Some people say that, some liberal philosophers will say that, as a matter of dogma or blind faith, that there is something intrinsic in us which is human, deserves equal respect, and is inalienable, cannot be taken away from us regardless. And I say, okay, so let's take one particular right they say we all equally have access to, which is the right to freedom, right? The right not to be stuck in a cage, in essence. Let's take that example. So, and we have this right, why? Because we're human. That's how the argument goes. So then, why are there criminals in prison? Are they not human? Have they ceased being human beings? And if their right to freedom is connected to just them being humans, and they haven't ceased to be human, then why lock them in cages and prisons? Surely then it would contradict their right to equality, equal treatment to humans who are not locked in cages. So this is the current dilemma of secular, mostly Western philosophers to produce any justification for the concept of equality. And many philosophers have noticed this. Louis Poyman, who wrote Are Humans Equal? A Critique of Contemporary Egalitarianism. He said, if we are to accept the empirical reality of people and their differences, there should be a presumption of inequality rather than the presumption of equality upon which so many political philosophers depend. Hunter Baker, a political scientist, he said, if we are equal, it is almost surely in the sense that we are equal before God, because we are equal in virtually no other way. So there is no other justification from a secular or a materialistic basis to say that we're equal. The Greeks had the concept of isonomia, which is, I suppose, identical before the law. But yet even they, firstly they had their way of life was based on religious convictions, but even they didn't give the same rights to women and to slaves and non-citizens of the Greek state, only free males. And why? Because the Greeks believed that you treat identical things equally. Now, of course, there's no basis for them to say that slaves are not equal to free people, free men, but their basis for equality from a materialistic basis is that with that which is identical should be treated equally. What is not identical cannot be treated equally, and there's no other justification for that. And anyone who believes in equality is really following an affectation from the Christian past of Europe. But we live in a secular world. We've now lost the ability to justify what our predecessors were able to justify based on their religious convictions. And many liberal philosophers have noticed this. They talked about equality and they said, Joe Feinberg said, equality is not grounded on anything more ultimate than itself, and it is not demonstrably justifiable. Isaiah Berlin said that equality cannot be defended or justified other than by reference to itself. So just believe it. You can't. There's no justification for it. And of course, Will Kimlicka, another liberal theorist, said the fundamental argument is not whether to accept equality, but how to interpret it. So really, they don't want to discuss if it can be justified or not. So then this raises a question as to then why equality? What does equality produce? And what are we actually aiming? There must be something greater than equality that we're trying to get at, we're trying to strive for. Now, you might say that, well, perhaps we should treat everyone as having exactly equal, identical rights under the law, rights and privileges and abilities. And this is just something practical. Let's not talk about the theory, just something practical. We should implement that. And what you see in some of the kind of redresses which are called for in the West, for example, they say that they want to have quotas for boards and ensure that women have at least, let's say, 40% quota on managerial boards. But if you were really into equality, we would expect to have 40% quotas of women in bomb disposal experts, soldiers, gutter cleaners, miners, and slaughterhouse workers. Why do we not see any calls for 40 to 50% women quotas for those jobs, which are mostly done by men? If you want to talk about equality and redressing imbalances, they've noticed that men live 10% shorter lives than women. Could you say, in the name of equality, that men should now be given 10% more resources than women to redress the natural balance? Because women have 10% more experience of life. When more 10%, you could say 10% more enjoyment of life. So then men should be given 10% more resources to equal out that natural inequality. We get to these kind of absurdities when we try to equal both sides of the equation, and we don't. But the problem is, we haven't discussed what we are trying to achieve, what objective that we're trying to look into. Now, I think I want to ask a pertinent question. Really, is are men and women identical? Are they actually identical? Now, in essence, in intelligence, virtually yes, or if not yes, completely. Scientists are coming up with different conclusions and things, but generally speaking, there's no evidence to show that men and women in their intelligence are different from each other at all whatsoever. There is some debate as to whether men can multitask and women can focus as much as men. But that's debated by scientists, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into that discussion. But there was interesting discussions, like by Lewis Wolpert, who wrote the book "Why Can't a Woman Be More Like a Man? The Evolution of Sex and Gender." But there are some things which are undeniable, which are different between men and women. The propensity, obviously, men to be stronger, have more stamina, and are faster. Testosterone. The rate of testosterone production in men is 20 times more than women per day. If you were to get a blood sample of a man and woman, find that the man would have 5 times more testosterone than women. Tests have shown that children exposed to great testosterone, including females, are more likely to be engaged in what we call rough and tumble play, according to psychologists who've done experiments on this and done observations of this. So testosterone plays a part, surely. And if an alien came to Earth and saw men and women, what would the alien conclude as to why men and women look different from each other? What would the alien think? Alien not being subject to our prejudices or our dogmas, what would the alien look if it was just analyzing us as creatures? What would they say? What would they look at? Say, why is there a chromosomal difference? What does the chromosomal difference mean? Why is it that men have tendency to have greater upper body strength, 10% more stamina? Why don't we see sports where men and women can compete in the same sport? So for weightlifting, or for boxing, or for wrestling, or for sprinting, why you have gender segregation in sports? And you won't see any of the Daily Mail or the Tory Party start being outraged at segregation at sports. Of course, it only applies to Muslims in university events sometimes. So why is that then? This is really the obvious. So what does it mean? What does it mean? The hormonal difference. Again, I'll leave this more to scientists who are investigating and looking at the evidence. But there is clear behavioural differences because of testosterone. I mean, there's more men in prison than women by far. I think it's 80 to 90% is men in prison. Not women. Why is that? Is that just nurture? Is this something about our acculturation? It has to be something based in some aspect of why women have 2 X chromosomes and we have an XY chromosome. There has to be a better explanation. So then, now I've discussed that men and women are not identical, but we are talking about equality, and I wanted to ask the question: what does equality? What should it aim for? What higher value than equality are we trying to achieve? And how can we justify it? Well, as the Swiss philosopher Henri Frédéric Amiel said, liberty, equality are bad principles. The only true principle for humanity is justice. And justice to the feeble is protection and kindness. And what the Quran says regarding the whole purpose of revelation of messengers coming down to mankind is elaborated in this verse of Quran. We believe God says, we sent our messengers with clear signs and sent down with them the book and the measure or the balance in order to establish justice amongst the people. So the higher ideal is justice. And justice is giving people what they need, what they deserve. This is what Islam does. So in Islam, if criminals are punished and other people are not punished, or people who are not criminals are not punished, we don't say this is an inequality with treating people who are both human. We say the criminals who commit an act of crime deserve the punishment, and those who do not deserve that. And this is where justice it would be more consistent than merely saying equality. Now, how does the Quran talk about the value of men and women in the eyes of God? Well, the Quran says very clearly in Surah Al-Imran, it says, God is saying, I do not waste the deed of any doer among you, any male or female. The one of you is as the other. So in the eyes of God, men and women are intrinsically or essentially equal in the eyes of God. But we also see this also in regards to race. So we see the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "O people, your God is one, your father is one," referring to Adam alayhi salam. No preference of an Arab, neither over a non-Arab, nor of a non-Arab over an Arab, or red over black, or black over red, except for the most righteous. Verily, the most honored of you is the most righteous. So we all start out fundamentally equal, but those who rise up in ranks over others is based purely on your morality, on your virtue, how you choose to be, how you choose to act will raise your rank. And the great thing about that is we all have equal access to equal capability to be righteous or not righteous. But we notice that the Quran also talks about just the condition of humans, where God says that He raises some humans up in ranks and He gives to some and doesn't give to others, and to test those with what He's given. So there are people who are rich in society, and there are people who are poor in society. Should we remove, if we want to be truly, egalitarians or absolute egalitarians, we should take the money from the rich and to equalize with the poor and become communists. Would that be a good solution? No, and that experiment was tried for 70 years and failed catastrophically with the Soviet Union. However, what Islam views the purpose of why there are people who are rich or people who are more healthier than others, our understanding of this is not that God is capricious or He's unjust. But what the Quran says is that when God gives something to some people, either a blessing of some kind, equal to that or commensurate to that, there is an equal responsibility that goes along with it. So a rich person on the Day of Judgment will have to account for what they did with their money, and did they spend it on the poor? Did they help people with what they were given? And it will be harder for a rich person to get into paradise than a poor person, because they have more things they have to be accountable for. And so ultimately, if you're given something, you're also given a commensurate amount of responsibility alongside it. And that, as in Islam, we call equality, ultimately. I'll just give an example. So we're not allowed to carry around, let's say, guns in the society. In London, in England, we're not. In America, you are. But in England, you're not allowed to carry around guns. So if you were to see a policeman on the streets carrying around a pistol or a gun, as we see in some places around London, I don't know about Leicester, but you probably saw a few of them at some point. Would we say that's not fair? How comes they get to carry around guns and we don't get to carry around guns? That's not fair. Why do they get that privilege? But we wouldn't say it was a privilege. Why? Because we expect the police to put their lives on the line lest some criminal comes out and they have to stop that criminal and protect the rest of society. So they're given the ability to carry the gun, but at the same time they have to put their life on the line to protect those who don't have guns. So we're not saying, so no one will ever say the police there's an inequality between the police and the general public, because alongside the police's privileges, they also have a commensurate amount of responsibilities that we don't have. Commensurate amount of responsibilities, and this is what Islam considers to be equality, overall equality. But first, I want to talk about, and it's a very big misconception, obviously, is what are the rights of women in Islam? Because this topic is related to. No one came in to this lecture thinking, I've heard so many bad things about men not having enough rights in Islam compared to women, so I want to see what this topic is going to answer. Probably no one thought that, unless you're a men's rights activist. So let me describe a bit more about what Islam gives women and their rights to defeat some misconceptions, because currently I want to try to contextualize what I've said. So what rights do women give? And these are rights, most of these rights women never had prior to Islam, especially in the Arabian Peninsula. So unlike what happened in the West and up until I think just last century, where they had this concept called couverture, which was basically women couldn't own property, their husbands owned their property and were even legally liable for them. So women were deprived of of their own responsibilities towards their own property. And sometimes a rich woman, men would like to marry her in English culture, for example, because they would take her property and be able to be the executors of it and owners of it and disposers of the property. In Islam, women have the right to own their own property, of which no one can touch the property. So they keep their property. When they get married, they keep their name. Their husband has no right to their property whatsoever. They have rights from their husband, which the husband has to provide. There's no choice on the matter. The husband must provide financial support to the woman during the marriage. She does not have to spend a single penny on her husband, even if she is rich and he is poor. The obligation is for a man to look after the wife financially, so she doesn't have to pay any money out of her own pocket. In marriage, she's given a marriage gift or dowry, according to an English translation of that, which is usually can be a considerable amount, sum of money. If divorced, the man must pay alimony to the wife and ensure that she is kept off the street and not penniless or made into a vagrant. The women have the right to vote in Islam. Now, what I mean by voting is the Pledge of Allegiance. In Islamic leadership discourse, the leader can only be the leader once the people give the leader the Pledge of Allegiance. So the people legitimate the leader. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was the first leader of the Muslim community, he requested the Pledge of Allegiance from both men and women. So we didn't need to have suffragettes or suffragettes movements. We didn't need to have dawdling over whether women can have equal political participation to select the leader and wait 1,000 years up until only just last century for women to get the vote. 1,400 years ago, women were given equal access and equal responsibility to legitimate the leader of the Muslim world. We also see that women have the right to work and own their own business. The Prophet's wife Khadija radiallahu anha, she was a successful businesswoman. In fact, she actually employed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that was his boss. And women have a right to education. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that seeking knowledge is an obligation on men and women. There was a case where some women complained to the Prophet Muhammad that when they were trying to listen to him, men were crowding around the front of him and they couldn't have access to him to ask him questions and learn from him. And so he gave women only days where women can have direct access and without being disturbed by some rambunctious males. We see that women have the right in Islam not to be abused physically or emotionally. One of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad asked the Prophet, "What do you command us? What do you say to us with regards to how we should treat our wives?" And he replied, "Give them food from what you have for yourself, clothe them by which you clothe yourself, and do not beat them, and do not insult them." In another narration, because do not impute ugliness to their face. So we see that in Islam, women can't be insulted, they can't be degraded, and they certainly can't be beaten. I would dare argue that women don't have the right not to be insulted in Western culture. In a marriage, many husbands and wives can insult and abuse each other. And it's not necessarily falls foul of the law, although people are now discussing about what is verbal domestic abuse being possibly not a form of domestic abuse. That's still being discussed. But we say that it is wrong for even the first insult to be uttered from the mouth. That is wrong, and we stop it. We nip it in the bud. So a woman has a right not to be insulted and to be protected from verbal abuse as well as physical abuse. Women have the right to choose who she marries in Islam. So we see there was a case where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was approached by a woman who said that her father had coerced her into marrying a gentleman, and so the Prophet said, "Well, do you want me to dissolve the marriage?" And she said, "No, I actually quite like him, but it's for the principle." So, and many other narrations that reiterate the same. In Islam, women have the right to her husband's time, affection, and sexual satisfaction by law. So a husband can't abscond or neglect his wife. In the West, under the law system, which is based on individualism, where you're all individuals, you can do what you want. You don't have to have any responsibilities to your wife if you're a guy. You can go out with your mates, you can ignore her, you can come home, not even speak to her, and that's not against the law, that's not wrong apparently in the Western legal system. But in Islam, the woman could take her husband to court and demand those rights. Because this is the thing though, Islam understands that we're human beings. Human beings need things from each other. We are social creatures. We're not individuals or autonomous islands that don't have any interaction with anyone else, and we're just happy when we're by ourselves. If that's the case, go live in a desert island and see if how happy you'll be with no humans around you. Right? As human beings, we need reciprocal relationships with each other. So Islam isn't individualist or believes in autonomy, because humans are not autonomous, full stop, even by nature. If no one taught you how to even speak a language, you would never develop it spontaneously. And right now, there's amongst anthropologists and sociologists, they're still wondering how language first came about, because humans don't seem to be able to generate it. They have to be taught it, and they can't generate it spontaneously. This is still a big discussion. So women have the right to, obviously, dignity and respect. And if the husband is negligent in any of his obligations, if he is rebellious to his obligations towards her, he can take her to court. So she can take him to court, and he can get punished. So this is the rights that women have in Islam, which I dare say don't exist to the full extent in the Western legal system. So this is what we consider to be rights. Now, I suppose if a men's rights activist guy was here in the audience, or girl, there are women men's rights activists too, they'd probably argue now that Islam is against men's sexual autonomy, because it forces men to satisfy the needs of their wife. Because for them, them and feminists, they're opposite number, they are individualists. And so individuals, they believe, should not be compelled to do anything. They exist for themselves. In Islam, we believe that we exist for God, and in doing so, we exist to serve each other, because we're a species. We're not just an individual. Now, Islamic society throughout history saw great women businessmen, great women leaders, great women scholars, jurisprudence. The modern university, as we'd understand it, was actually set up by a wealthy female businesswoman in Morocco, in modern day Morocco, 1,000 years ago. We see that the scholar Sheikh Akram Nadari, who looked through historical documents, and he found 8,000 female scholars from the early times of Islam, these were Islamic scholars, jurisprudence, 8,000. The reason why he capped it, he said he stopped at 8,000 because it was just too much, and so he just had to, he had to publish his book by a deadline. So he capped at 8,000 and didn't continue documenting, but he documented 8,000 scholars before he had to stop, and so on. So in Islam, we don't see that women have a deficiency of intellect at all. There was, in the time of Caliph Omar was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then succeeded him in leadership after Abu Bakr as the head of the Muslim world. And he had an advisor, a political advisor, advising him on political strategy and with dealing with people's needs, and it was a woman. He also employed a street judge, not to be confused with Judge Dredd, the Islamic concept of a street judge, but street judge who would go to marketplaces, ensure that people weren't cheating each other, weren't being deceptive, and the street judge was a woman. So Caliph Omar, and this is all in 7th century. Right, this is not last century, or this is 7th century. We had women being judges, women being scholars. Some of the greatest Islamic scholars from history, like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, even Imam Bukhari, were all students at one point in time of female scholars. So they were students learning from women scholars. So we didn't have this rule that firstly, we don't have a clergy, and secondly, we don't have a clergy, and we don't have a restriction on women from attaining positions or teaching about Islamic knowledge. In fact, it's 40% of narrations about the Prophet Muhammad's life in Sunni narrations are narrated by a woman, which is Aisha radiallahu anha, which was one of the Prophet's wives. So in Islam, women can work. Women actually can even join the army voluntarily. Obviously, for men, being a reservist is obligatory in Islam. But for women, they can voluntarily join the army. We saw women who were voluntarily joining naval forces. Women can be, I said, positions of political consultation, judges, scholars. So in Islam, we didn't have any restriction on women education, women entrepreneurship. But I would say more importantly, gender just really wasn't an issue. in the West, we're so fixated by gender. We group people into so many different categories. We even have categories for race, the black community and the white community, as if your color of your skin somehow affects your culture. Or even sexual preference, where they say that this is the gay community. I say, how does your sexual preference create an entire culture? You know, we categorize humans into these groups, and we say we try to say this group has to have also bits of power of this or that. In Islam, it was irrelevant. We transcended this groupism or identification groups, or identification politics, which is commonplace this day. And it didn't matter if you were a scholar and you met the grade, you were a scholar, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your gender. It was just irrelevant. They didn't even consider it. No one complained that Umar had a female street judge or a female who was advising him. No one cared. It was not, as long as she was doing her job, it was not an issue. So we completely transcended sexism. This is actually a problem which happened in the West. Now, but where there are differences or functional considerations is actually just related to the private sphere, not the public sphere. And the private sphere is the family. The fundamental unit of society in the Muslim political philosophy is family, not individuals and not the community. Communists will say the society is the fundamental unit of society. Liberalism, or political individualism, if you want to call it like that, believes individuals are the fundamental unit of society. But in Islam, we consider it to be the family is the fundamental unit of society. The family gave birth to you. An individual, you didn't give birth to yourself as individuals, you came from families. Your families nurtured you. It's the first support mechanism that most of us had. It's what taught us language, what taught us morals, and what nurtured us. It's the family. So then really what Islam tries to do is it takes the differences between men and women and tries to produce a symbiotic relationship to create an efficient family structure which is fair to all and involves reciprocal relationships, because as I said, we're social creatures. We're not autonomous individuals as liberalism would have it. So what does the Quran say about the matter of the family? Well, first and foremost, the Quran says that men are the protectors and maintainers of women, because God has made one of them to excel the other. So people translate that as maybe like physical strength and so on, and because they spend to support them from their means. So men support and maintain women and protect women. There must be some reason why men are physically stronger than women, why nature, evolution, if you believe, or whatever you want to believe, why the basis for made men different to women. And in Islam, it's interesting. People say that the foremost consideration in Islam must be men, and women are just tag-alongs. But this is not how the Quran describes it. If anything, the Quran describes the purpose of men to revolve around women, not all the way around. So our job as men in the family is just to be the protector and maintainer of women. So we are the ones which revolve around the nucleus, and the nucleus is the woman in the family. And the Quran continues. It says, and women shall have rights similar to the rights against them according to what is equitable, but men will have a degree of responsibility over them. So how Islam organizes the family is that it aims to protect women. It aims to see that they are maintained and they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, or to feel vulnerable, or to feel exposed. So this is how Islam tries to organize the family relationship, and it's actually done to honor the woman, not done because she is somehow weak or incapable and so on. It's not how Islam looks at the matter. First and foremost, the Islamic perspective of the woman within the family context is actually gives her more respect than the father. So according to a narration of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when a man came up to him and asked him, he said, "O Prophet of God, should I respect who should I respect, my father or my mother? Who should I respect more, my father or my mother?" So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Your mother," and then my father, and then he said again, "No, your mother again," and then he asked, "And then my father?" "No, mother again." And then he said, "Father." So the mother is respected 3 times more than the father, because her position in the family is so key, it's so important. She gives birth to the future of mankind. That's not something which is worthless or meaningless, like some modern day feminist advocates like to portray. Not all feminist advocates, but some modern feminist advocates like to portray that women having a motherly role is somehow diminutive. That if only a woman can only have value if she contributes economically to society. And that's a very materialistic way of looking at human worth. So a woman's worth is only how much she can contribute economically to society. That's very materialistic. So the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's teachings gave women 3 times more respect than the father in a society, in the family. Also, the Quran commanded men to live with women on a footing of kindness and equity. And it also says if you dislike something in them, it may be that you dislike a thing which God brings about it through a great deal of good. So it even tells men not to be judgmental on women and not to nitpick or find fault. It said if you find something you think is a fault, maybe God has put that there and he'll give you a source of goodness. Maybe there's a hidden good in that. So don't judge women, don't find fault or complain about them. So value women. Islam respects women so much that it tries to protect them from being viewed as sexual objects. If you actually want to see how a society values life, see how a society values the source of human life, women. So we see that in capitalism, where everything is a commodity, women and feminists complain about this, that women are made into sexual objects to sell products, that they've become one-dimensional creatures related to their beauty and their physical appearance. They're judged by their physical appearance. Women are made to feel by society now that inadequate or invisible if they don't put up makeup or don't show the most beautiful face they can put on and beautiful appearance they can put on. They feel like that people won't give them attention. They won't attain any position of power or have anyone's time or even get married to Mr. Right. So this is how society, and this is what some feminists have complained about modern society, Western society rather. This is the situation that's been created. But what Islam did is, when it ordained protections like the hijab and the niqab. Now, first and foremost, Islam aims to remove sexual politics from society, from both men and women. Most men are not allowed to show body shape, and we're not allowed to expose from the navel to the knee. So any guys here who go to gym and somehow coincidentally just like to wear very tight fitting clothing, pay attention to that. You're not allowed to do that if you're a Muslim. So as Islam, it protects both men and women from sexual objectification. And it's not, people say that, is it because you think they're going to get raped, or you're protecting them from rape? So it's got nothing to do with the issue of rape. The issue is the dignity of humans. That is the fundamental issue first and foremost. Forget about rape. Even if there was 0 rapes in any society, the fundamental issue is the dignity of human beings. That's what has to be protected. Both men and both women. The head covering and the jilbab, or the body covering, is the purpose of it is actually a woman's passport into the world. It's her passport. It's her ability to go outside and pursue what she wants professionally, educationally, in a respectful manner, without being accosted or viewed in a certain way or judged on her appearance at all whatsoever. We remove the issue of appearance from society and instead replace it with only valuing with the content of people's hearts and the content of their characters. That's the purpose of hijab. You'll also see that in Western society, when you see obviously women on the streets who are being told by fashion magazines and pressured by billboards and adverts to look a certain way, that this causes a lot of trouble just between women. So women become envious or jealous of each other they judge each other by looks themselves. So women will judge themselves by looks, judge each other by looks. So now that women actually now degrade them, are robbed of dignity even from how they look between themselves. And the problem has also got to the point where even if a woman is married to a husband or in this society a boyfriend, sometimes she feels insecure that there are other women who are obviously very attractive and are displaying that attraction in society, and that her husband or her boyfriend's eyes might stray. And now even vice versa with men being as well. Is that a society whereby humans can live cohesively, can live in a sense of peace and tranquility when we're all competing with each other to outdo each other, to be more attractive than each other, to attract attention away from other people's spouses? This is not conducive to, I just think, any kind of peaceful or enlightened society. That's the point. So Islam tries to dignify humans by removing these social compulsions for beauty. And what we've seen that in the West there are some very horrific practices which are done, which are now are totally legal. When they bring up the issue of female genital mutilation, which in Islam is not an Islamic practice whatsoever. It's a traditional practice in many parts of the world. Many of these parts of the world are not Muslim at all. It's just practiced in that area of the world for centuries. But when they raise the issue of female genital mutilation, I often wondered why the issue they called it was female genital mutilation, because in the West you can undergo, and women are increasingly doing so, going to cosmetic surgeons and undertaking labiaplasties, which by the very definition is mutilation of the female genitalia. But they say, oh, that's okay because it's consensual. Okay, then so maybe you should then describe the problem with FGM as non-consensual female genital mutilation. Don't just say female genital, because you seem to be okay with FGM if it's done by the consent of the woman in a plastic surgery somewhere in the city. So they don't have a problem with FGM as long as it's consensual. So the issue really is consent. Whereas in Islam, we don't believe that people should have to mutilate themselves to look attractive or look beautiful. We don't believe that, and we try to eliminate social compulsion for women to look a certain way, like airbrushed models in a picture, such as women are forced now, in some cases they feel they have the need to be anorexic. Bulimia is on the rise. We see that people inject collagen or Botox, which I believe is derived from botulism, which is some kind of, which is very nasty if you think about it. Just to get the inflammation of the lips. I view these as mutilations of women, and it was mutilations induced by social pressure and social compulsion. I think that's a kind of oppression on women. I think that's a kind of forcing them to look a certain way in order to get some kind of attention or elevation in that society. So the hijab and jilbab is actually there to liberate women from these very negative social forces and eliminate sexual tension from society, sexual politics from society. Because you don't go out into society for intercourse or sex, you go out into society to work, to study. You don't go out, sexual intercourse happens in the privacy of your own home. So why are we bringing sexual politics out into the wider society? Now, people might say that, why is it that women have to cover more of their body than men? This is an argument they bring, saying, isn't this an inequality? Is this unfair? But the argument is very simple, is that anatomically speaking, obviously there's more, women have more anatomically related reproductive matters upon them compared to men, that's just the nature of it. But what you'll also find even in Western systems, they also give differential rights based on biology as well. I'll give you one example. So one example I like to cite is it is said that men and women have equal reproductive rights. And what you'll find with many feminist advocates is they'll talk about women's reproductive rights. And usually the right to abortion, they say, right to abortion. So they have reproductive rights. The right to abort their fetus or to see it to term. But a simple question, do men have equal reproductive rights to women? Do we believe in equality in this matter? And they'll say, okay, yes, they do. Okay, so if a man, obviously he has intercourse with a woman, she's pregnant, he wants to see his fetus to term, she doesn't want to see the fetus to term, she wants to abort it. Will the man's rights, equal rights to reproduction, be respected or have any say in the matter? No. So whether she wants to terminate or see it to term, he'll have no say in it. And if she wants to see it to term against his will, then he'll be forced to pay child support by law, even though he had no say in the matter. Does that sound like equal reproductive rights between men and women? Of course, people will say, but women have to carry the child or carry the fetus. I say, okay, fine. So you're saying that different biological circumstances causes different rights. And so in principle, they also agree that the biological differences necessitate different rights. So they don't disagree with the principle. It's just now where we put these barriers. Of course, in Islam, we don't believe in obviously abortion. We believe obviously sex must be within marriage. Reason being is marriage offers the protections to women and protections to men and the protections to children as well. And the man can't abscond. In an individualist society, the man can abscond. He doesn't have to take care of the woman. He can just walk away with no other obligations towards her or her children, and she'll be left literally holding the baby. So, how Islam to round up how Islam deals with the issues between men and women is not one where they says we must have exact identical equality, and that's how to bring justice, because we see that identical equality doesn't bring justice, because men and women are different, and they're going to have different matters, as even in the West, we're giving differential reproductive rights, even they have to concede. So what Islam aims to do is to create equal justice for both, depending on their needs and their circumstances.